You should run, little mate.
The door is barred.
The bolt slid home behind her with a sound like a verdict, and Wren Calder understood, in the space of that single iron note, that there was no unmaking this. Whatever waited in the dark ahead of her, she had just chosen to be shut in with it. Her lamp trembled in her hand, its small, cracked flame throwing one crooked line of light across a floor. No servant in Hollowmere Keep had walked in 3 years. Something breathed in the darkness beyond that light. Not the breath of a man. Deeper, rougher, drawn through clenched teeth like a bridge being crossed one plank at a time. "Put out the light," said a voice that did not belong entirely to a king. She didn't. Her fingers only tightened. The shape resolved itself slowly out of the black, a man on his knees in the center of the chamber, spine bowed, both hands pressed flat to the stone as though the floor alone were keeping the world level. His shirt lay discarded behind him. The muscle across his back stood out in hard, trembling lines, sweat catching gold where her lamplight touched it. And when his head finally lifted, his eyes were not the deep brown the household whispered about. They burned pale gold, fixed on her the way a starving man fixes on the one thing in a locked room that might save him or ruin him entirely. "You should run," he told her, and did not move, though every line of him looked ready to. "The door's barred. Then you should have thought of that," he said, low and rough, "before you decided to be brave." His breathing caught, a shudder working down through his shoulders. Of all the nights, of all the women in this castle who might have opened that door. "I'm not. I know what you're not." He rose. It cost him something visible to do it slowly, to unfold rather than lunge, and even controlled, even fighting himself with every inch of the movement. The sheer scale of him stole the breath from her throat. "I know exactly what you are not, which is safe, and exactly what you are, which is the first scent in 4 years that has made the thing inside me go quiet instead of louder." His jaw worked. "Do you have any idea what a dangerous combination that makes you, little mate?" Her lamp shook between them, the flame guttering and steadying, gold light and gold eyes meeting in the dark, and somewhere behind her, the household had already begun pounding on a door that would not open again until it chose to. Chapter 1. 4 days earlier, Wren Calder had been thinking about wicks. It was, in its small, unglamorous way, the whole shape of her life. Noticing what everyone else in Hollowmere Keep walked past. The East Gallery's third sconce guttered whenever wind came off the ridge, because some apprentice before her had trimmed it crooked and never fixed the slant. Wren fixed it. Then she climbed the ladder in the gray hour before the household woke, when the keep still belonged to her the way it never did in daylight, and drew her blade along the wick until the flame stood straight and true. She was 23 years old, lampkeeper by inheritance rather than ambition, and she had learned, the way servants learn everything without being told directly, that some doors in this castle you did not carry light toward. The long north wing had no sconces at all. Nobody had asked her to hang any. "Up early even for you," Captain Doric said, falling into step below her ladder, helmet under one arm. "Or up late." "Early." She climbed down, wiping oil from her fingers with the rag she kept for exactly that. "Any word on Sela?" His face answered before his mouth did. 4 days now since the laundry girl, 16, quick, terrified of spiders and nothing else, had been sent up the north stair with a delivery and never come back down. The official word, passed hand to hand like a coin nobody wanted to hold too long, was that she'd run off with a boy from the lower village. Wren had trained Sela for 11 months. She knew the shape of that girl's ambitions, and none of them involved a boy from the lower village. "Steward Ash says the search found nothing past the Ridge Road," Doric said carefully. "Says she likely took the coast route." "Does he?" "Wren." His voice dropped, not unkind. "Whatever you think happened, the North Wing isn't yours to go asking about. It never had been. That was the trouble. 3 years ago, it had been her father's post to carry deliveries to the king's own chamber, personally, every quarter, on the nights the household called the hollow moon, and spoke of only in whispers. The nights the young king barred his door from the inside, and the guards barred it again from without, and nobody asked what happened between those two locks. Then her father had gone to make his delivery one hollow moon, and simply not returned. The post had passed to her within the month, the North Wing deliveries quietly reassigned to men who answered only to Steward Corwin Ashe, and no one had explained why. You did not explain things to a lampkeeper. You handed her the corridors that were left over and told her to be grateful. She had been grateful, mostly. Until 4 days ago, hunting through the oil stores for her father's old ledger, she'd found the loose stone behind the third rack, worn smooth at the edges from years of prying, and behind it, a book she recognized by the handwriting, before she recognized anything else. Delivered to the North Chamber this quarter, silver reed, as always. Smell of the returned vessel wrong, bitter beneath the flower. Told Ashe. Ashe says nothing wrong with the batch. 3 weeks later, the hand pressed harder into the page. Second vessel, same bitterness, stronger. Asked to test it myself. Told the king's stores are not the lampkeeper's business, quarter or no. The last entry had no date. 4 words. The ink nearly torn through the paper. I am not imagining this. Wren had sat on the cold stone floor with that ledger open on her knees, and felt something in her chest settle into a shape it would not leave again. She did not believe her father had run off. She did not believe Sella had either. She found Doric again that evening in the armory, oiling a blade with the automatic care of a man whose hands needed occupation while his thoughts worked elsewhere. What is the hollow moon? She asked. Not the rumor. The truth, if you have it. He glanced at the door before answering, which told her more than his words did. Once every 2 turns of the moon, the wolf runs stronger in all of us for a handful of nights. In most Lycans, it's nothing. Restlessness, a short temper. In the bloodline, he tipped his head upward, meaning the king, meaning the crown itself. It's closer to a flood behind a door that isn't built quite tall enough. He locks himself in. We bar it again from outside so no one wanders in and gets killed for their curiosity, and so he can't come out mid-flood and hurt someone he'd never forgive himself for hurting. And if something made the flood worse, his hands went still on the blade. Such as? I don't know yet. That was mostly true. But my father thought the oil going up there was tampered with, and the same men who told him that was none of his business are still the only ones carrying it. Wren. He set the blade down. Whatever you're building toward, stop building it out loud where Ashe's people might hear the shape of it. She didn't answer that directly, because by the time she left the armory, she had already decided, not the details yet, only the direction, that she was going to find out what was wrong with that oil. Not because she was reckless, because she seemed to be the only person left in this keep, both curious enough and unimportant enough to ask. The household bell would ring for the hollow moon in 3 days. She meant to be watching when it did. Chapter 2. She watched from the shadow of the north stair as Ashe's man, a thin, forgettable servant named Pell, whom nobody would ever suspect of anything, carried the sealed vessel up alone, 4 full days earlier than her father's ledger said any delivery should come. He set it in the antechamber, knocked twice on the inner door, and retreated so fast that Wren understood, with a cold certainty, that even Pell was afraid of what waited past it. The vessel sat there, unattended, waiting to be carried the last few feet in. She had spent 3 years believing the most useful thing about her was that she could go anywhere in this keep, and no one would think to ask why. She had never tested how far that belief would carry her. She tested it now. Better her hands on the oil than his, she told herself. Better to know exactly what she was carrying into that room. She lifted the vessel, pushed the inner door open before her nerve could catch up with her feet, and heard, from 3 corridors back, Pell's voice rising in alarm to someone she couldn't see. Then the door swung shut behind her on its own great weight, and a bolt she had not touched slid home, and the dark ahead of her began, very slowly, to breathe. For 3 full heartbeats, she thought the room was empty. Then the black resolved into a shape, too large to be only a man, kneeling with his head bowed, hands pressed flat to stone, as though the floor alone kept the world from tilting. "Put out the light," he said without looking up. "I only meant to—" "I know what you meant to do." His voice roughened, dropped, became something underneath the crown entirely. "You meant to be careful and clever and quiet. You were. It still brought you here, which should tell you something about how well careful works in this castle." His head came up, gold eyes, burning with their own small fire, fixed on her, and did not waver. "Put out the light." She didn't. "You should run," he said again, though he didn't move, didn't so much as shift his weight toward the door she'd just sealed behind her. "The door's barred." Something that was almost a laugh and almost pain moved through his chest. "Then we survive until morning, and I make you a promise I intend to keep, even if it costs me everything I have left tonight." He rose, slowly, deliberately, fighting his own body's need to close the distance in one motion rather than 10, and even controlled, even shaking with the effort. The sheer size of him standing filled more of the room than seemed possible. "My name is Rurik. I don't imagine that matters to you at the moment, but I would rather you know whose control you're trusting than think you've locked yourself in with a nameless animal. I know who the King of Valemore is. Do you?" He said it softly, almost to himself, gaze moving over her face like a man memorizing something he was afraid he'd only get to see once. "Then you know exactly how much worse this could be right now, and exactly how much I am asking of myself by not touching you." His hand lifted, stopped an inch from her cheek, hovering there, close enough she could feel the heat of his palm without the weight of it, his whole arm trembling with the cost of the choice. "I could take anything I wanted from this room tonight," Wren called her. "There is no one alive who could stop me, and no wolf in me that would think to ask first. I am asking instead. Because some part of me under all this noise still knows the difference between wanting you and being owed you." Her lamp shook between them. "Then don't give me a reason to be afraid of you." "I won't." His hand curled slowly into a fist and dropped to his side, an act of will so visible it looked like pain. He stepped back, one full pace, deliberate, the first real distance he'd given her since she'd walked in. "The door will not open again until the 3rd dawn. I need you to trust me on one thing tonight, and I will give you every answer you want once daylight makes me only a man again. Stay where I ask you to stay. If I tell you to move, move. Can you do that?" "Yes." He retreated to the far wall and folded himself down against it, putting the whole breadth of the chamber between his hunger and her stillness, and did not take his eyes from her face again. Outside, faint through stone, fists began beating against a door that would not answer them. Chapter 3. He kept his word through the worst of it. The first night he stayed against the far wall while the flood in him rose and receded like a tide testing a seawall, and when the pull toward her grew visibly worse, his hands flexing against his own knees, a low sound building low in his throat, he asked her, hoarse, to move to the shuttered alcove. And she went, and the distance seemed to give him something to hold the way a rope gives a climber something to hold. Twice he rose without warning her first, and both times he caught himself before he'd crossed more than a step, breathing through his teeth, forcing his own body back down against the stone. "I can smell you from here," he told her once, voice wrecked. "Do you understand what that does to a mind already coming apart at the seams? Tell me." "It makes the wolf want to bury you in furs and guard the door with his teeth for a century." A ragged, not quite laugh. "It makes the man want to know if you take honey in anything warm, and whether you've ever seen the sea, and why in God's name you walked into a locked room instead of screaming for help like any sane woman would have." "I'm not sure I've ever been called sane." "Good," he said low. I find I have very little use for sane tonight. By the second night, his control had banked from raw flood to something closer to embers, contained but never fully out, and he could sit nearer without his whole body straining like a leashed animal. When he needed to reach the water basin across the room, he warned her first. "I have to move, little mate, don't startle," and crossed the space slow and deliberate, bracing one broad hand flat against the wall beside her rather than touching her at all, close enough that she felt his heat like a struck flame, close enough to hear the ragged discipline in every breath he drew. She watched his jaw clench, watched a muscle jump at his temple, and understood, with a clarity that startled her more than his eyes ever had, that his restraint was not the absence of wanting her. It was proof of exactly how much he wanted her, held in a fist tight enough to shake. She reached up and laid her palm flat against his chest before she had fully decided to. He went utterly still. Under her hand, his heart slammed once, twice, a hard, uneven rhythm. And then, slowly, impossibly, she felt it begin to slow itself against her palm, matching the calmer beat of her own pulse, the way a struck bell settles after enough time against a steadying hand. "That should not be possible," he said very quietly, gold eyes fixed on her face like she'd just proven something he'd spent his whole reign refusing to believe. "Maybe it isn't possible," she said. "Maybe it's just true." He didn't move away this time. He let his forehead drop, slowly, until it rested against hers. Not a kiss. Not yet. Just the weight of him leaning into the one steady thing in the room. And for a long moment, neither of them spoke at all. And the silence between them said everything speech would have ruined. By the third night, the worst of the fever had passed, banked to something almost human. And it was then, in the low hours before the final dawn, that he told her about his brother. "Eden," he said, staring at his own hands. 4 years ago. My first bad hollow moon as king. I hadn't yet learned how much heavier the crown makes the flood. I lost the thread of myself for perhaps a minute. When I found it again, he was bleeding on this floor, and I had done it, and I remembered none of it at all. His jaw worked. He lived. He left court within the season, and has not spoken my name since. Not from hatred, I think, but because I never gave him reason to trust the door wouldn't be worse the next time. So I decided the safest thing I could do for everyone I loved was make certain no one was ever close enough to become him again. "That's not safety," Wren said softly. "That's just a different kind of alone." Something moved behind his eyes that had nothing to do with the wolf. "You may be the first person to say that to me instead of thanking me for it." He was close now, closer than restraint should have allowed. And when his gaze dropped to her mouth, she felt the pull of it like a tide, felt him lean the smallest fraction toward her, and then stop, jaw tight, hands closing to fists at his sides rather than reaching for her. "I want to," he said, rough. "I have wanted to since you refused to put out that light, but I will not take our first kiss from a night you cannot leave, and I am not fully myself. When this door opens, little mate, I will let you walk through it if that is what you choose. But do not mistake this restraint for indifference. My wolf has learned your heartbeat tonight. I could cross every kingdom in this world and never truly let you go. And I would still rather burn until dawn than take from you the one thing that should only ever be given." The bolt released itself with a groan of old iron, just as the first gray light found the shuttered window, and they walked out together into a corridor full of guards frozen mid-panic. And Wren understood, from the way Captain Doric's face went slack with relief and then sharp with calculation, that whatever had happened in that room had just become a fact the whole keep would eventually have to account for. Rurik accounted for it plainly, in front of Ash's carefully composed face. The lampkeeper had entered an error. She had shown him more courage in 3 nights than most of his court showed in a lifetime. She was a guest of the crown from this hour, not confined. A guest. It was, Wren thought, the first time in 3 years anyone had decided something about her life in front of her, instead of around her, and gotten it right. Chapter 4. The days that followed did not feel like courtship at first. They felt like two people circling a fact neither quite trusted yet. He sent for her. Not summoned. Sent word, a distinction she noticed and he seemed to notice she noticed, to ask whether the ledger she'd mentioned in the dark still existed. She brought it. He read every page standing at his own window with his back to her. And when he turned around, his face had gone the particular gray of a man recalculating everything he'd believed about his own household. Ash's men, he said. Not necessarily Ash himself, but your steward orders the delivery. 4 days early, this cycle. Then we test every vessel that burns near me again, he said, and something flat and dangerous entered his voice that had nothing to do with the wolf at all. In the smaller hours, the real changes showed themselves. He learned, without being told, that she'd eaten the last cold plate at the servants' table for 3 years, because no one thought to save a lampkeeper anything better. Within a week, the rotation quietly changed, no announcement, no credit claimed. He noticed she paused at the same gallery window every dusk to watch the swifts turn over the ridge. Her father used to point them out, she'd told him once, half asleep against the chamber wall. And when the stonemasons came to reglaze that wing, he made certain, personally, the window stayed exactly as it was. He recognized her footsteps in a hall full of them. He went still, once, when a young envoy from the eastern hold leaned a shade too close to her at the evening table and let his gaze linger a shade too long. Rurik said nothing, did nothing but rise, unhurried, and settle into the chair beside her instead of across from her, his shoulder a bare inch from hers. His voice dropping into something low and easy as he asked the envoy a question about Eastern trade that required a long and detailed answer. The envoy understood the warning without a single threatening word spoken. He did not look at Wren again all evening. She called him on it in the gallery afterward. "You didn't even raise your voice," she said, and that man went pale as a sheet. "I know you are not mine to command," Rurik said, watching the swifts rather than her. "That does not mean my wolf enjoys watching another man imagine you might become his." A muscle moved in his jaw. "I did nothing to him. I only made certain he understood where he stood." "And where is that?" "Beside a woman who has never once needed my permission to choose anyone," he said quietly. "Including me." It was in that same week that he made his first real mistake, smaller than the one to come, but its shadow. He saw the crack running the length of her lamp's chimney glass, the flaw she'd carried 3 years without once considering worth mending, and had a new one delivered to her room the following morning. Polished, flawless, without a word of explanation. She returned it to him within the hour. "You didn't ask," she said, and there was real heat under the words. "You saw something broken and decided, without asking me what I needed instead of what I had. Next time, ask." He looked at the lamp a long moment. "You're right," he said simply. "I'm sorry." He didn't take the old one back, didn't try to argue her into the new one either. He let her keep the cracked glass, and he never mentioned the mistake again, though she would learn, weeks later, that he had. It was on the 9th night after the hollow moon that he found her in the gallery at dusk, and instead of speaking, he simply stood beside her, close enough that his sleeve brushed hers, until the swifts had gone to roost. "I would like to touch something of yours," he said finally, "if you'll let me, only if you'll let me." She turned to face him fully. The last low sun caught gold at the edges of his eyes. Plain brown now, nothing of the wolf in them, only a man choosing his next words with obvious, careful weight. "I have imagined this since the second night in that chamber," he admitted, low, and his hand came up slow, giving her every chance to step back, until his fingers found her jaw with a gentleness that seemed to cost his whole enormous strength to hold that light. "Tell me if I've misread this." "You haven't." He kissed her slowly, carefully, a question answered rather than a claim taken. And when she rose into it, when her hand found the front of his shirt and held on, She felt his control slip its leash for exactly 1 unguarded second. Felt the full weight of restraint he'd been carrying since the moment her lamp had first found him on his knees. Before he gentled again, deliberate, his other hand settling at her waist as though asking permission even there. When he finally drew back, his forehead came to rest against hers, his breath rough and unsteady in a way his voice rarely allowed itself to be. "Little mate," he murmured, "you have undone 4 years of very careful discipline in the space of 1 gallery." "Good," she said, echoing his own word back at him, and felt him smile against her hair. Chapter 5. She found Sella 3 weeks later in the cistern beneath the old East Cellars. Not by accident, but because Mender Ilsa had mentioned in passing that the water stores hadn't been checked in months, and Wren, who knew every storeroom in this castle the way other people knew their own hands, had simply gone to see. She found a girl she'd trained thin, shaking, and alive behind a barred grate, and the moment Sella's eyes found her, the whole quiet architecture of Ash's crimes began, at last, to come apart in pieces. Sella had seen Pell handling a second vessel 3 nights before her disappearance. One drawn not from the usual store, but from a locked cabinet in Ash's own study, its oil carrying a bitterness she hadn't understood until Ash's man had caught her watching and shut her away, rather than risk her tongue. Mender Ilsa confirmed what the bitterness was within the hour. Duskbane, a poison that inflamed a Lycan's loss of control during the hollow moon, and, given enough cycles, could tip a wolf past any hope of returning. The unmaking, the household had always whispered, never believing anyone would engineer it on purpose. The reason surfaced next, cold and complete. If the king's mind failed permanently during a hollow moon with no heir standing ready, succession law handed the regency to the steward's own hand until council could elect a permanent crown. A council Ash had spent 4 patient years quietly buying, 1 favor and 1 silence at a time. Every worsened flood brought that regency closer. Every servant who noticed the tampering was a thread that, pulled, would unravel the whole design, and so, 1 by 1, the threads had been cut. Her father's fate came last, and it came whole. Buried among Ash's own study papers Wren found only because Rurik, for the first time in his reign, ordered every door in that wing opened to her without condition, was a single line in the steward's own hand, dated the week her father vanished. Calder threatens to bring the ledger before the king directly. Cannot be permitted. Handled quietly. Beneath it, in Sella's shaking testimony, given before the council itself, the final piece. Her father had gone to Ash's study that night, not to steal anything, but to demand, one last time, that someone above him look at what he'd found. He had not run from this castle. He had died defending the king he served, in the one conversation that never should have needed defending at all. Wren stood before that line of ink a long time before she could make herself speak. It was not the closure she had wanted. It was, at least, the truth. And after 3 years of not knowing, even a hard truth was a mercy. Ash was arrested within the week, the evidence too complete to argue away. What no one had accounted for was the cost already paid. The poison had done its damage in silence for months, and 3 nights after Ash's arrest, the household bell rang for an unscheduled hollow moon, early and wrong. The king's control already fraying at the edges of a cycle that should not have come for weeks yet. It was in the chaos of that same week, after Ash's own man had cornered Wren on the cellar stair as she brought Sella up into daylight, a blade meant for both of them catching her forearm instead, shallow but bleeding freely, that Rurik made the mistake that mattered most. He did not shout. He went very quiet, which she would learn was worse. By morning, guards stood outside her own door with orders that she was not to leave the tower until every last thread of Ash's conspiracy had been accounted for. No one had asked whether she wanted protecting. No one had asked her at all. She confronted him 3 days later in the same gallery where he'd kissed her, and did not raise her voice, because she had learned by now that quiet cut him deeper than anger ever could. "You did it again," she said. The exact thing you promised you wouldn't. I warned you when you replaced my lamp. You heard me. You didn't understand. You still think loving something gives you the right to decide where it's safest kept. You were bleeding in a cellar because of what you found for me, he said. And for the first time since the hollow moon, she heard real anguish crack through his discipline. I couldn't. You could have asked. Her voice stayed level, which cost her more than shouting would have. That is all I have ever wanted from you. Not to be kept safe by a man who decides things for me in the dark. To be trusted in the daylight with the same courage you saw in that chamber, instead of shut away the moment it costs you something to watch. He didn't defend himself further. That, more than any apology, was what finally broke something loose behind his eyes. You are right, he said quietly. Fear built a door around you exactly the way it built one around Eden. I did not see it happening until you named it. He crossed to her, close but not touching, hands open at his sides. Tell me what you need. I will build nothing around you again that you did not ask for yourself. The guards left her door within the hour. He did more than release her. He asked, plainly, what her plan was, and when she told him she meant to bring the ledger and Selah's testimony before the full council herself, in daylight, with her own voice and no one speaking over her, he did not offer to do it for her. He gave her the floor and stood beside it. Stuart Ashe did not go quietly when the guards came for him in the great hall. Evidence laid bare before the full council in Wren's own steady voice. But he went. 3 nights later, the bell rang for the hollow moon no one had scheduled, the last cruelty of a poison whose source had already been cut, working itself out of Rurik's blood the hardest way it knew how. Chapter 6. This time the door closed on her own choosing, and that made all the difference in the world. Rurik had tried, at the last, to refuse her. The poison hasn't finished with me, he said, gold already bleeding into his eyes at the antechamber threshold. His hands braced against the frame as though he might yet order her away by sheer force of will. I cannot promise you what's left of my control tonight. You don't have to promise me anything, Wren said. I already chose. That was never yours to decide for me. He held her gaze a long, shaking moment, and then, for the first time, he let her walk past him into the dark. He fought the flood harder that night than she had ever seen him fight it, the poison's last violence working through him, even with its source in chains. But her silver-reed oil burned clean in the corner, and her crooked lamp stayed steady beside him. And when his hands shook too badly to trust themselves at all, she simply took them in her own and held on, and did not let go. And he did not ask her to. At some point past midnight, he sank to his knees before her. Not in submission, but because it was the only position in which some last piece of him could still be trusted to remain still, and rested his forehead against her waist, her hand still folded in his whole enormous frame trembling with the effort of staying a man. I have spent my life, afraid I am a monster wearing a crown, he said, voice wrecked. The wolf wants to surround you, guard you, never lose your scent again as long as either of us breathes. The man loves you enough that he would still open that door and let you walk through it even now, if that is what you choose. His hands tightened, just slightly around hers. Both of us want the same thing tonight, little mate. We want you to choose us. Not because a bond decided it, because you looked at everything we are and stayed anyway. I already stayed, she said, throat tight. I'm staying now. By the third dawn, his eyes had cleared entirely, brown and steady and fully his own, clearer than she had ever seen them. You stayed, he said. I chose to. She tightened her hands around his. There's a difference, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you remember it. Then choose me again, he said low. When this door opens for good, in daylight, with nothing forcing either of us to be anything but exactly what we are. I will, she said. Every day you ask me to. He kissed her then, slow, certain. No fever left in it at all. Only the plain, devastating tenderness of a man who had finally stopped mistaking protection for permission. And when he drew back, his voice had steadied into something she would carry the rest of her life. "If you ever ask me to open a door, I will open it," he said. "If you ask me to release your hand, I will release it. But hear me clearly, Wren Calder, because I will only ever say this once with my whole chest behind it. If you choose to stay, I will love you with every part of the man and the wolf I have spent my life containing. I will never let this world make you invisible again. I will never let fear or politics or another man's ambition take your place in my life. I will never let you go. Not because I hold on, but because I will spend every day proving I am worth being held onto in return." The formal reckoning came a week later, before the full council and every noble who had spent 3 years walking past her without learning her name. Rurik did not ask her to stand quietly at the edge of the dais. He asked her to stand beside him. For 3 years this keep, let a woman who has kept every corridor in it lit, go unseen in every room but the ones no one else wanted, he said, his voice carrying to the rafters. Her knowledge of these oils, her courage inside that chamber, and her own investigation are the only reasons any of us are alive to hold this council at all. That ends today. He turned to her, and this was not command but question. Offered, rather than assumed. "Wren Calder, will you accept the title of Warden of the King's Flame, with full authority over this keep's chamber and its hollow moon preparations, answering to no steward's word but your own judgment?" "I will," she said. And it was, she understood, exactly the correction of every wrong door he had ever built. Not a title handed down to keep her safely inside his walls, but the very authority she had always been denied, asked for rather than assumed. A season later, on an ordinary evening that held no hollow moon and no council and no reason at all for either of them to be anywhere but exactly where they wanted, Wren found the King of Velmore kneeling at her own hearth, frowning with fierce concentration over an unlit lamp, her lamp, cracked chimney and all, still hers, still uncorrected, trying, with visibly untrained hands, to trim the wick the way he had watched her do 100 times. "You've never lit one of these in your life," she said from the doorway, laughing. "No," he admitted, striking the flint a second time, a third, until at last the small flame caught and steadied, throwing its familiar crooked shadow across the floor. He looked up at her, and there was nothing of the crown in his face at all. Only the man. "But you've spent your whole life giving light to every room but your own. I thought tonight it was someone else's turn to give it to you." He drew her down beside him, only after she leaned into the space he'd left open for her, his arm settling around her with the careful, deliberate weight of a man who had learned, at great cost, the difference between holding on and holding someone still. And in the small, crooked light of a lamp, neither of them had ever thought to replace. Wren Calder understood that she was, for the first time in her life, entirely and unmistakably seen. Thank you for staying until the last flame caught. If one moment from this story stayed with you, the door that sealed behind her, the lamp he never replaced, the promise he made with his whole chest behind it, tell me which one in the comments, and stay close for the next story waiting in the dark.